So brilliant. We're going to kind of get started. Martha, you've given us a little kind of background to your kind of history, which I think is fascinating, given that you are a kind of trained engineer. You've worked for one of the biggest tech corporations kind of in the world. You've obviously kind of been a founder startup in the kind of marketing industry as well. And your platform that you've built in Schema Markup it's for marketeers who don't code. Is that essentially the audience you want to go for, therefore making it very simple and straightforward to people to access the power of Schema without having to get involved in actual coding?
Yeah, so the coding is one piece. The other is like we are semantic technologists underneath the covers. So we're like super nerds, which means that like we are going to also really teach our users how to do proper schema markup, and when I say with that, it's like about not just like putting schema markup on every page, and we'll talk a little bit about best practices, but really sort of like nesting things and identifying relationships between bits of information. And then also like we'll store it in sort of a knowledge graph way, because we really anticipate that in future we'll actually be sort of looking to reuse that information. So, it's not just for people who don't want to code, it's also for people who want to do advanced schema markup and sort of, have expert level sort of markup on their site.
Okay, we're going to delve very deeply into that. Why don't we start off with a couple of kind of broader questions just to sort of set the scene. So,
sure.
Given that our audience is primarily marketeers, whether they're working in-house agencies as kind of freelance kind of consultants, why should this audience, and the businesses they serve really care about Schema? What does it do for them? What's the kind of compelling benefits to why they should invest in it?
Sure. So this has really evolved since 2014, like when we first started doing schema markup. In essence, at the beginning, a lot of it was around, Google trying to find a way in order to truly understand the content. And so if we actually like go backwards and say like, well, why did they create this language called schema.org? It's because they wanted a way to definitely understand what the markup was and help their machines, frankly, be able to do it easier, right? So if you think of it from also a financial standpoint, like if we do the work so the machines can better understand the information, Google can then better understand it and match it to the searcher's intent, which is their, big, hairy, audacious goal, and provide service like through the search engines. And then you can extend that to where they make revenue and ads. So a lot of the foundation is around understanding to meet user needs. And then in order to drive adoption, they really brought out these features that you can then get. So we're familiar with stars, FAQ is a new one that's come out. That's one of my favorites. Everything from like events. So these rich results really then are sort of, what they did to drive adoption. Now, from a business perspective, when you have those rich results, you stand out in search. So from like the broadest kind of standpoint, and then people click on it more and engage with it more. And so we've seen sort of, like some of the data we have is from about like 100 different kind of mid to large size customers. We see it impact everything from like impressions, click-through rate, time on site, and then even to conversion. So whether that be like to book a meeting or, fill out a form or actually purchase something. So we're actually seeing it across the board. And Google's been, they have a case studies page that sort of goes through all the different case studies. And even as far back as, 3-4 years ago, they've continued to add, case studies that like the one-liners support this sort of, value to the business across that buyer journey.
Okay, so from a marketer's point of view, our objective is to drive, incremental business for our customers, whether it's, acquisition, retention, upsale. You're saying that Schema has a capacity to improve the metrics at all points in the funnel, both at the very
Correct.
top sort of visibility in the search, right through to kind of conversion. And knowing what I know about Schema, I can understand how it can help with visibility. But how does it materially impact the bottom end of the funnel then? How does it impact engagement in the site and conversion and revenue?
Yep.
What's the correlation?
Yeah, to me, it comes down to quality of traffic, right? So if there's better understanding of the content and sort of, let's use a local business, like what that service area is, what they actually offer, the services or the products or so forth. And Google can better position that because they want people to get the answers and get sort of the thing they want. So they stay on Google so they can show them more ads. Those higher quality leads or traffic then end up on the site. And because they're a better match for the content that you have, they're going to spend more time reading it. They're not just going to have a quick bounce rate because it's like, oh, well, this isn't really the article I wanted. It's like, oh my goodness, this is the article on gypsy moths that like I now figured out why there were 100 caterpillars on my tree. And I'm going to read the whole thing because I have to now figure out how to get rid of them because they can eat an acre of leaves like within an hour. So like part of it is, it's that quality piece, right? Which then goes back to that fundamental element of why they started on this on 2011 of building schema.org, which is around understanding.
Interesting. So you're right. So it's about Google being able to, with much greater clarity, understand the services and the location, if we're talking local, that a local business provides,
Yeah.
then match up the results with user intent. Therefore, the traffic that ends up going through to the local business website is better qualified, higher
Correct.
intent, which
Yep.
reads through the funnel to hopefully, kind of purchase and, kind of greater kind of ROI. I get that. That's very kind of compelling, kind of through the funnel kind of
Yep.
opportunity. How much easier? So let's say you had a website that doesn't have schema, and then you add, the relevant kind of schema, kind of optimization
Mhm.
markup to it. You're able to quantify just how much better and easier that makes it for Google to understand the content. Like, what is the value add on
Yep.
top of, a base site? Is there any way to kind of quantify that?
We have a couple case studies. Like it really depends on the type of content. And then also, I'll say like the other good technical SEO things that you're doing in order to make sure that I say like, I'll raise all boats, right? So if you have a crummy website that's really slow, that's not mobile optimized, and you do schema markup, the impact's going to have less of an impact than if you actually are doing all those other things right as well. So one thing we always say is like, it's not a silver bullet in that like you can just do that one thing and ignore the other kind of core things that you need to do in technical SEO, and sort of get that result. The second thing though is like, so hard numbers is what you're asking, and it again depends on the content, and the content is so important. So maybe one of like the key takeaways of the people watching today is that don't just think of schema markup as like, oh, I'm just going to optimize and I'm done. Often when you're optimizing, there's big insights and content opportunities that you're either doing today or that you should be doing. And let me give you an example. So let's say I was looking at a site this past week and they had these like amazing pages around their software, and the sort of the software offers that they had. And software is interesting because it's a product, but there's not usually a price on it, especially if it's like a mid to large site. But there for sure can be FAQs about that product or that feature. And so, here's an example where, as we're looking at optimizing it, it's about a product, it's about these different things. But because we can't put rating on the product's not there, the price isn't on the product, FAQ would be like an amazing opportunity. And so it's like that way, then they go back to like, oh, well, let's strategize, let's look at the type of content we want found and that we want to stand out, but how do I maximize the opportunity sort of with those rich results? We've seen one single FAQ page on it, like that was about an organization, get like 1.3 million impressions in a month. And it was like one FAQ page. One of our case studies is with Keen Footwear. Over the year, they saw 20% revenue growth that they can attribute to marking up their products for their US site. So that number, like often, will be in double digits, like over 10% with regards to impression and clicks. Depends on how you do conversion, sort of where that has an impact. But we have also seen it in the thousands. The case study we just released with SAP most recently showed like 400% growth year over year, sort of just with rich results after we did schema markup on, like articles and question and answers. So it depends on the content is a key takeaway, depends on doing the other technical SEO, and then again, sort of like making sure that you're doing it properly.
Does schema, we've talked a little bit about, I guess, from a kind of organic search and the impact that Google understanding your content better can have on your visibility in organic search. How about paid search? Does it have any impact there? And I guess even off the core search engines, once you go to, let's say other sites that might index, let's say, Facebook, for example,
Yeah.
does it have any impact or benefit there?
So Facebook's interesting in that they've been using Open Graph for a long time as their, I'll say, like structured data type of solution. Although we did see, I don't know how many months ago it was. I feel like I've been in the COVID like time warp. Probably like 6 to 8 months ago, we saw like Facebook actually using some of the structured data on articles and products, and that was new. So I'll see if I can dig up sort of an article or any sort of documentation support that we saw on it. But we did see that 6 to 8 months ago from Facebook. But I'll say historically, they've been sort of just focused on the Open Graph, which is sort of not being collaborative with, the other search engines work on schema.org. Bing does use a lot of JSON-LD and schema markup, and Microsoft One is one of the founders from schema.org. They tend to be a bit slower to document what they're doing than Google. I feel like Google is still sort of like primarily driving it. You asked one other question, Miles, at the beginning of this, though.
PPC.
Thank you. So PPC is interesting. There's been an interesting shift around like images. So if we actually like go back let's go back 2 years, we actually saw some pretty, regular sort of updates to the schema markup recommendations from Google for their features where an image became required. So it became required for a local business, it became required for article and a couple other different elements. And it was interesting because we kind of were like, oh, that's interesting. Like all of a sudden images are becoming, more required across the different features. And then we saw Google sort of put more emphasis on the search experience where, now like there's images, like you can do just like image searches. And then most recently, I think it was at I'm going to get my months wrong. In the last couple months, Google released their metadata feature for images. And what's interesting about this one is that it's actually asking you to use schema markup to license your images. And the reason I bring this up is because like images are really core to the ad side of things. And we know that they're already sort of using some, like they're still giving ratings on some things like within ads. And I would expect that we're going to see it sort of move more into the ad space. I was on a panel with a guy from Google 2 years ago who was on the ad side, and he was like, look deeper, look deeper. And we haven't yet like been able to connect those hard dots. We have had some of our customers tell us that their cost per click reduced significantly after implementing schema markup, and we think it was tied to the quality score. But I've had yet to someone like do a case study with me on that. So if someone's interested in doing a case study and is really deep into ads, please reach out. We're happy to sort of do some testing around impact to quality score, because we've had quite a few people tell us it's had a positive impact, but no one who's willing to share their data.
Yeah, that would be fascinating to really try and get a clear correlation with schema and
Miles, we can do it. If no one else will do it, maybe that's what you and I.
We'll do it with you. I mean, we don't do a huge amount of kind of PPC.
Yeah, do we?
We tend to rely a lot on events like this and other kind of channels. But what we do, we're not particularly advanced in our schema. Hence, the fact we're having an ongoing conversation about doing it. But that's certainly on the table. Brilliant, Martha. Why don't we jump in? We've got 17 questions, so let's jump in. And we're going to pick from the top. So everyone, remember to add your questions in to ask a question and upvote the questions that you want us to go with. First question has got 6 upvotes, which is great. This comes from Jacqueline. Jacqueline says, so have you seen strong results, either increase in CTR traffic from using FAQ schema on local business sites? I've seen a lot of law offices using this recently. So I guess it's an extension of the question we just kind of talked about in terms of evidence of performance improvements, specifically around the FAQ schema, specifically on kind of local business sites. Yeah.
So let me start at high level with some bigger sites, and then I'll give you some specific examples. So we have seen FAQ work very well across all different types of content. So not just local business, but articles. We use it on just like a whole range. And there's even like a collection page. So if you have a page about a lot of different things that's about a topic, FAQs worked really well. So we've seen that sort of on I'll say service area type of landing pages where, like they're selling insurance in this type of service area, and you're trying to like write a bunch of locally produced content. And part of that is an article, part of it's related blogs, part of it's a video. And then you also have your FAQ. What's beautiful about that with collection page is you can get that FAQ to show up sort of for those local searches. I shared a number that was from one of the hospital networks we work with where, like they optimized one FAQ page and saw over 1 million increase in impressions and clicks sort of like going through. what we've also been asked often is like, are we seeing spamminess or like overuse of FAQ? And I would say like there is a bit of that, but if you're actually thinking from a local business on even the types of questions that come up in Google My Business on like what are the top questions about that location, those are really good ones to add in FAQ. And so a specific example for local is actually in the physician space that I saw recently, where so physicians are interesting in that they're getting the star rating because they have a very rigorous process in order to how they get ratings. And physician is a subtype of local business. And what I saw recently was that it was like so think of it as like the local business physician page. And on that, they had done FAQ around common questions or common content that's usually on a local business page. So for a physician, so like, are you accepting patients? What is your specialty? So this is content that's like already on the page that they then sort of were able to frame in freedom of questions. And what was really interesting was that they were seeing a really, really amazing result. And again, because they're special, they also get the rating. So it had a rating and then also an FAQ for that page. And it was not one of my client sites. It's actually like one of the aggregator sites that I saw do this, but I think it's a really, really kind of awesome approach to thinking of FAQ and getting great results. And we pretty much like recommend using FAQ. We did some research. We're doing more primary research at Schema because we have so many customers using Schema Markup, and we can actually start to correlate results. And so people often ask, like, should you use FAQ because you don't get the click? Like, is it going to end up in a 0-click search? And so we actually looked at click-through rate across all the different features for 88 different customers of ours across all different industries and size of businesses. And so this is where we'll get more specific over time to kind of do some case studies and research on it. And it was sort of landed in the middle. So it wasn't horrible. It wasn't the best, but it was right in the middle. And so I think from like a standpoint of it's still good, it will end up in some 0-click searches, but you can actually use things like HTML within your answer, making sure you have a couple like really long answers so that like Google will show more and then they have to actually click to your site to read the full answer. That you can use in order to make sure that you're still getting that click-through rate. But I see it as a formidable, really good strategy, especially for pages that, like a local business page, maybe like you can't get that rating, you're getting something on mobile, but it's not that different from Google My Business. FAQ is a great one to use to stand out.
And do you typically sort of advocate the use of FAQ content and markup within a landing page? So it's an element of content on the page. I think you call them kind of compilation pages, as opposed to dedicated FAQs sections, which sit in a different part of the site.
It really depends on the customer journey, right? And so this kind of comes down to that content piece again, right? Of like, where are people going? So in the case of that hospital, like there was enough FAQs about that hospital that we like wanted to have a dedicated page. And so what we did is we said, like this FAQ is about this organization, which was the hospital, or hospital, if we're being really specific. Whereas, like, if you already have a landing page, it's like your local page that's about the hospital, and it has a lot of different things on it, and the FAQ is just part of that, then you can use the property subject of. So the primary page is about the hospital, but it's the subject of the FAQ, and both will work for rich results.
And what you're referring to there, is that what I understand is kind of nesting of schema?
Correct.
On a page?
Yes,
Where you've got,
Miles, high five.
I have learned something. I mean, it's only the third time we've
Yes.
spoken about it. I think I've got a COVID brain. Anyway, so talking about nesting schema and about what that means, what you're trying to achieve, how to do it correctly, and what pitfalls to avoid. So let's see if you can address that as a follow-on question.
Sure. So like some of my like things not to do with schema markup.
Well, just and with nested schema, like what is good to do? Why is it valuable? And also, what are the pitfalls to try and avoid?
Sure. So let's go back to that example I just shared around FAQ. So if the page is about like that local business, or in that case, I was using the hospital, the page is about the hospital, right? Like that's the primary topic of this page. And so, if I don't nest it and I have it as its own separate FAQ page, Google's going to say, okay, this page is about two things. It's about the hospital and it's also about this FAQ page. And remember at the very beginning, I was saying like, it's about bringing clarity and being, absolutely clear on like what the content's about. In that case, I'm not being clear because I'm saying it's about two things. Now you can use a property called main entity of page in order to say like the hospital is the main entity, but even better is like the FAQ is about the hospital. So let's nest it so that, hey, the primary page, there's no question it's about the hospital. And it also, the hospital is the subject of this FAQ. And so it really is taking that doing proper schema markup, right? To where you're also sort of being very, very clear as to what the page is about. So there's no question of that. And that you're like in control of which one you actually want to kind of have as the primary subject. Therefore, sort of, if someone's searching for information about that local business or that hospital, like Google knows that that's the primary page because it's about the hospital.
Okay, and so as I said, it's about kind of providing that kind of clarity to kind of Google about what a page is about, what the kind of hierarchy of importance of kind of content on that page. In terms of your own application then, so I guess some people have seen it going, this is getting quite complicated and quite kind of complex. How does, with a little bit of an advert for Schema App, how does Schema App connect into a local business website, and how does it solve this complexity problem so that when you're marking up a landing page or a sort of service page on a local website, how does Schema App make that really straightforward for marketers?
Sure. So from an integration standpoint, like we can integrate with any website through. So if you're on WordPress, we have a WordPress plugin called Structured Data, WordPress plugin with Schema App, and then we, Shopify, some others where we just automate it. So like especially if you're using Shopify or BigCommerce or WordPress, and you just like need to get blog organization product piece, like that makes it really easy. But we can also integrate and do custom schema markup on any type of page then where you author it in the app and then you sort of connect through those plugins, or you connect through a tag manager. So again, any tag manager, or you can put the JavaScript directly on the site. So our intent is that like you set up the integration once and then you focus your time on strategy and sort of what you need to mark up that's important for your business to be understood. And we have a ton of resources sort of on like how to do things, but also we have support. So like there's humans, that sit in Guelph here who answer your questions. Every one of our customers, even during the free trial, get a free onboarding call, and it's like 30 minutes of consulting to not just how to use the tool, but like how do we actually optimize one of the pages on your site to get you that win and to help you understand sort of how you might do this. And especially in every website's unique and business is unique, and so how do we make sure that we're giving you those answers? And then email supports throughout the whole thing. So if you have questions around where's the right resource for this, or I'm working on this page, I've done it this way, like can you give me a second opinion on it? Our support team is really enabled to do that. So I would say, we make it easy that you integrate once and then you use the application and then you can make updates. You don't have to talk to dev. Google's making changes all the time and sort of like, what's required, what's not required, oh, by the way, you need this added property, or, oh, we have this other feature. All of that's sort of in Schema App. We have all the extensions, all the properties. So when I'm managing, like I'm mentioning some of these really specific properties, that's all in there.
Okay, so it sounds like you've gone a long way to simplifying the process and helping people who are kind of grappling with it for the first time
That's
to
right.
really kind of make it easy. Do you have a sense of how much time or investment is needed to schema up a local site? Like if you're a marketer out there, got a new client, and they've either made a hash of schema or they've not got it, or it's a new site. Can you give us an understanding of how much time and resource we should be thinking that we need to allocate into the project, into the build or the updating of the site to properly get it up to spec with schema?
Yeah, so I would separate the learning schema markup from like the actual optimizing, because the learning part is actually the heavy lifting part, right? So how do you understand how to ask like what is this thing and what schema markup should I put on it and how do I nest it and how do I look at the features? And there's actually a resource Jamie can Google for us to put in the chat, which is like how to do a schema markup strategy, which is like us just helping you identify like what pages should you do, how does it map to schema markup, how do you to map that to the Google features, and then prioritize appropriately. And so a lot of that learning around the vocabulary, what a property is, so like takes a while. So yeah, they just shared we do have a 5-day email course that sort of like introduces you into the strategy and concept. And then actually during COVID, I shared our advanced boot camp, which is about 20 hours of actually, I don't think it's 20 hours. It's 4 hours of like, my co-founder, Mark, sharing, all the intricacies of schema.org and how it works. And so if no one can find it, I will make sure that we get that sent to include in the blog. And so that's something that we opened up during COVID for just people to learn. So we've estimated like 40 to 60 hours of just like learning time to really understand how schema markup works. And then the applied time, so for one of my customer success managers, if I gave them, let's say, like 10 pages to optimize on a local business site, sort of like it's all their services pages, their key products, their about page, their contact page, their homepage, and maybe their 5 locations, they could probably whip that out in a couple hours. But again, it's that learning process, right? So I think, once you sort of have invested some time to kind of learn some of the foundation pieces, so let's say you take those 4 hours of my free boot camp, then the key is like just getting your hands dirty. So that's why we do that like 30-minute onboarding piece, like to try to let's get you trying to get those first wins and see how it works. And then we've started publishing a lot of examples of not just how to do it in the tool, but also what like the output of that looks like, so that people can really start kind of doing that practical learning. And then, a lot of our agencies who sort of use our tool on a lot of different sites, once you get a hang of it, it actually becomes really easy. And then you're like, oh, I know how to do this. Like a contact page is a contact page, and this is the type of content. What we find often is that people will start doing their optimization, realize that they don't have at least the required and recommended properties, and then have to go back and update the content on the page to reflect then what they put in the markup. So, so it's I would say like once you have that foundational learning, and then you either use tools, and I really recommend like whether you're using, Merkel's generator or schema app, like use a generator to generate the schema markup. Like there's so many commas and quotes and so forth. People have write it sometimes to learn it, but then afterwards, I really recommend using a generator. What's unique about us is it's saved and has a data piece to make edits and sort of make things different.
Okay, brilliant. So in a sort of summary for those kind of wanting to kind of become experts or proficient in this area, there's some upfront working to be done, as there is with anything to do with kind of digital marketing. You've got to put the investment in to kind of really understand it and understand how it works and use it. But once you've got that foundational learning, actually, and you've become practiced in the art of using the tool, it can be pretty rapid. And actually, the nice thing about it is it can identify kind of gaps in your content, things that you might be missing that might be advantageous to have on a page in order to help you rank, help you gain visibility, help people understand what the sort of page is about. So I guess in a way it kind of goes beyond, its benefit can go beyond what it's kind of designed to do, which is to mark up the content by actually identifying where you're missing certain content elements.
And just to shout out, the boot camp is out like a little bit out of date, but it still has all the fundamental things. But you'll laugh because it's like there's like so many more features than this, and it's like, yes, we know it, some of the intro stuff needs to be updated, but the core stuff is really, really dead on and still really relevant.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for putting the links in the chat as well. That's really kind of helpful additional reading. Let's jump back into the next kind of question. I hope, Jacqueline, that answered your question thoroughly. This question comes from CJ. No, hang on. Sorry, the questions are jumping around. This question comes from Rob. Rob's question is, Google's now said that schema does not help in SEO. In your view, is this true or false? And why would Google, I guess, state that, given that schema is kind of a Google created entity and device?
So that's not what I'm seeing at all. So I sort of see that as false. Remember, there's lots of different spokespeople from Google that represent different organizations, right? So, depending on whom you're talking to or who's advocating it, it could be like, oh, well, we don't use it in our space, or in my work or project, it's not relevant. So I would say like always look at the source and then sort of figure out sort of what's going on there. We have seen, if anything, like a huge acceleration through 2019. So we've been doing this since about 2014. I was talking about schema markup and no one cared. And then finally, I'd say I joke that in 2017, I was like, 2018 is going to be the year of schema markup. And it totally wasn't the year of schema markup. And then in 2019, starting in sort of May, they announced FAQ and how to. We saw a ton of new reports in Google Search Console through the fall. We saw the big rating and review change in September. And then, in November, December, we started seeing everyone starting to talk about structured data and how it's, becoming, I'll say, like one of the top 10 things to do for SEO. And it sort of had never really been on that same kind of level or kind of playing field. And this was reported, I think the one that kind of really jumped out at me was at the beginning of December, they held that webmaster conference for the first time in Mountain View, where they invited SEOs from around the world to kind of meet with different members of the Google team, and structured data was mentioned in almost every single presentation. And so out of that meeting, it became like, oh my goodness, like this is something we should actually be working on. We've been talking, like Guha, RV Guha is like one of the founders of schema.org. He kind of co-founded it with someone from Microsoft and Bing. And he, when we talk to him and Dan Brickley, who runs schema.org and so forth, like they're still very invested in this. And if you actually, want to get super nerdy about it, like you can go and watch the Googlers having the conversations in GitHub for schema.org and see that they're constantly making recommendations and updates. And, if you want to know what's coming down the pipe, like if you follow that GitHub, you can see, like we know like some things that are coming out even before they're like announced and supported, because like they're actually trying to get them added to the vocabulary. So I would say like we've seen more vocabulary releases since January of this year. They used Schema Markup as like a primary way to communicate COVID information out, and got that sort of released very quickly. And then we're, seeing them now sort of make sure they're updating people on what the changes are, again, trying to drive adoption. And I think we'll continue to see more and more features. I believe, like one of my favorite quotes from January from John Mueller was like, schema markup's going to get more complicated. So like, it's time to invest in learning it. If I could have a t-shirt maybe that said that, and then schema app on the back, like that's, we see them continuing to invest in it and it seeing us accelerate.
Yeah, so I think, I guess bringing it back to the kind of original question, I mean, one way of looking at it is that if Google is putting such a lot of attention on schema, then that's a good enough reason for us to also be giving a lot of attention, because Google sees the kind of sort of value in it. I guess also kind of referring back to something you said earlier in terms of schema not being a silver bullet. If you apply schema markup to a site that is already poorly optimized, it's not going to solve all your problems. Thereby, on its own, schema won't necessarily improve your ranking and improve SEO performance, but it can potentially act as a kind of multiplier. If you've got the other things correct in place, it just helps Google understand that kind of site content better, which, as you said, a rising tide raises all ships. Your site will kind of gain from that, but by maybe schema having a multiplier effect on the other good stuff that you've done. Brilliant, Martha. Thank you. Rob, I hope that dispelled that kind of myth for you. Always take Google's words with a pinch of salt. Okay, question coming in from CJ here. CJ's question is, can you stack multiple locations in local business schema? And a follow-on question is deploying schema via GTM still working, still viable?
So let's address the first one quickly. Absolutely, yes, you can do it via GTM. In fact, they've now documented you can do schema markup via GTM. We've been doing it on all different types of sites since 2014 with no problems. And in fact, when people started saying it wasn't working, we actually emailed those trying to drive adoption at Google and was like, you should stop talking about this. It's working fine. So, when you're using GTM, you have to make sure the timing's done right, like all the things normally to make sure the Google bot sees it. But yes, it works great.
Okay, and sorry, there was a previous.
So the first question.
Yes, can you stack multiple locations in local business schema?
Yeah. So actually, so when you have like a page that talks, let's say, about like the whole brand or the organization, and then you list like your different locations on the page. So it kind of comes down to like how the page is set up. So the primary page is about that brand or that general organization, and then it has sub organizations that sort of link to those different ones. So you can kind of list them together. So again, you want to sort of define those relationships between sort of, is the page just talking about those different locations, and then you can list them, but you can actually do it in sort of a nested way. And I actually have a graphic I can maybe share. This might be helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on one second. I'll just share this.
You're gonna share your screen. Okay.
Stand by. I think this is all right. Here we go. Can you see this?
I'll spotlight it as well. There you go. Well done it. Perfect.
Okay, cool. So if like the homepage contains multiple, you'll say it's like either the organization or local business and then sub-organization and then list them all. And then if the homepage and then multiple locations, you would then again do local business on each of these individual pages and link them back to organization. But the one you're talking about is more this first case. So I would sort of, what's the grouping of them? If it's like about that primary organization, I always talk about organization can be like the brand or the virtual kind of entity or like the headquarters. And then you have like the local business has to have a physical address that someone can go into. So that would be sort of the key thing. So yes, you can put them on the same page, but you would need to make sure that you nest them.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant, Martha. That was a useful graphic to have to hand. I'm going to close your video.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah. So basically, it's very flexible. You can essentially kind of mark up the page based on in any way you really want to. Just kind of getting it right. That kind of relationship between kind of organization and location, the kind of parent-child configuration. There's many ways to do that based on what you're trying to achieve. So flexibility is the key. There. Brilliant. Okay, I hope CJ that answers your question. Next question comes from Mohammed. Mohammed says, let me try and just interpret this a little bit. A business has 50 verified listings, but business pages don't have any schema on it. Okay, so it's again about the site. So when he says listings, I guess it's business with 50 locations. Each of those locations has an individual kind of business location page, doesn't have schema on it. Do you recommend to add schema for these business pages or not?
So yes, like they have local business as a Google feature within the Google documentation. And then because you have a Google My Business page, you would use that very strong associator called same as and link to the Google My Business page so that it's very clear that that page on your website is indeed, the same business that you have in Google My Business.
Okay, fine. Okay, you've unearthed something that I wasn't necessarily aware of here. So let's just go kind of unpack that a little bit. So this is really super relevant. So how do you, using schema then, connect a specific location page to a GMB listing? What's the right way to do that?
You're going to use the property called same as. So same as is exactly how it sounds, right? Like this is exactly the same as this business that's located here. So often same as, like historically they used to have like social media you'd put in the same as, like, oh, it's the same thing as I've listed in Facebook or that I've put for the Twitter account and so forth. They've moved a bit away from that. But same as is that really strong connector that you can use if something's exactly the same as. So in this case, GMB is a perfect connection there.
And can you use that? Can you use multiple of those, or
Correct.
Is it just, yeah, you can. Okay, fine. So it's nothing. It's not GMB specific, but it's just basically flagging out that the same as does what it says on the tin. Very straightforward. Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Imagine the vocabulary being logical like that, right? Like once you sort of like ask it in the right way, I feel like there's other things within schema.org that become more logical if you sort of like are able to kind of connect that together.
Brilliant. Okay, another question is coming from Jacqueline. She says, what are your kind of go-to types of schema for local businesses? I guess another way of looking at, where do you see local businesses getting the biggest bang for buck, biggest ROI and return in terms of the kind of markup that they use?
So local business for sure is one. And then services and product markup I really like. Now product can still get ratings. You can also do FAQ on product. And then I also really like, if you can't necessarily show one price, a range of prices is also good. And then services is, I don't know. I'm a little sad about services because like Google hasn't sort of raised it to sort of a feature level, although I think so many local businesses offer services versus sort of like a product. So the right way of doing services schema markup is to use the services schema markup, to still add the price and rating if it's available. But then for services specifically, I would use FAQ, right? Like as a way to get a rich result in search. So again, you see me sort of using this very flexible tool called, FAQ. How-to is also very flexible, but I think those are really great ones. And then also your articles, right? Like just making sure, especially, there's a lot of features that perform very well on mobile. So video, article, how-to is another great one, and even FAQ on mobile. And so some of it's also thinking about, like, I know from a local standpoint, mobile searches and how like people are looking for information as they're like going to a location, or it's me like on a Saturday trying to figure out like which hardware store is the right one to get to or that I can find. Making sure that they show up and really stand out in those carousels on mobile is where they're really powerful.
Okay, you mentioned how to there. How does that kind of differ from FAQs, and can it be used alongside FAQs on a landing page to add more potential for rich snippets?
Yeah, you can add as many as you want, as long as you know how to kind of pull them together. So, how to is really a step process. So, you see this used very frequently. I'll say like the model of how to sort of in a recipe, right? Where it's steps, or we see sort of the Home Depots or the big hardware stores talking about like how to build a table or how to build a fence. But it can be really anything that's around, how to do something. And it's really about, having the different steps delineated, an image per step. So, this is again where if you're looking to say like, oh, I have this great article, right? And it's actually talking about how you do something that's very related to our business. This would be a great opportunity to go to the Google documentation, look to see what's required and how that content needs to be written for how to, and then using that markup. And how to's underutilized, I would say today. So
Okay.
yeah, so I think there's some decent opportunity there.
Interesting. And how about what's the sort of situation regarding use of ratings and reviews on local businesses in terms of the opportunity that it still holds, given that the results no longer delivers sort of star ratings in the SERPs?
So we all cried that day because local businesses that weren't only impacted, but they also removed ratings and reviews for articles and blog postings and so forth, which was a great way we used to kind of stand out in search. So a couple of things. I do think like the intent behind that change was like to make it so that there was like more honest information. They were worried that people were sort of adding kind of spammy ratings on that. And so that's where they sort of pulled back to say like if you were authoring it, you couldn't actually qualify for that rating. Although like I said, 2 or 3 weeks after they made the announcements, they reissued them for physicians because especially in the US, there's very strong restrictions on how they can get physicians. So to me, I would say like I don't think the story's over. I think we might see it continue to evolve as they find way to like how do we make this trustworthy. And there's lots of other SaaS businesses, our friends of ours who run ratings type of organizations who really try to bring in that honest, trusting piece. Google My Business is a great way. They recently did update the requirement to say that you couldn't refer to a third party. That was sort of a way to do it in the past. So right now, again, look at other opportunities for rich results for those local business pages. FAQ is the one I really love. Again, you're already thinking like that because you have the questions within GMB that you can reuse. But I would still put that rating information on those pages and add the schema markup. 2 reasons. One is like you still want that rating information because it's about that user, and you also want Google to understand it. They may not be rewarding you on it, but they're still using it to understand. And then, like I said, I think it is going to continue to evolve. So short term, look at other features that you can try to get that bigger sort of standout in search, get those increased impressions and clicks.
So your advice is still to mark up star ratings on pages, but not to expect to kind of get any additional kind of presentation, riches in sort of search results. But you still think there's value in doing it for Google to understand. Maybe it might give a quality signal to the page and the entity that's being reviewed. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's open up the question box again. Great questions, guys. Really enjoying the kind of variety of kind of questions coming in. Another question, actually. This one is from Brandon. What's the best schema for Google Search Console right now? Sorry, it's just jumped to my page. I have to find that question again. What's the best schema for Google Search Console right now? And what's the most powerful, rich result for businesses right now?
Well, Search Console like has lots of different reports now. They're moving to like a single report, for each of the different types of rich results. So in Search Console, there's been a change where they used to like report rich results in sort of like one giant lump, and now they're kind of pulling it out. It really depends on the type of business as to which one drives the most performance, right? So, if you're an e-commerce company, like it's likely going to be, your product and rating rich results. If you've done a really strategic job using FAQ, it could be just FAQ. That's actually driving a lot of your traffic. So it really depends on the type of content that you have and the type of business that you are. I would say like it depends. Yeah, it really just depends on the content, because I couldn't even just say like, oh, we see just like glomules of performance and results from like this piece. And it also depends on your experience on your website, right? So it's, like rich results get people impressions there, but then actually, for people to click, you have to have, the right language there, for them to stay on the page, it has to be good, rich content. For them to convert, again, you have to make sure that you're giving those opportunities.
How about sort of, let's say, typical kind of blog content, and it could be on any kind of sort of business? What kind of value and opportunity does optimizing for schema give for just sort of standard kind of blog content? And then what kind of advice or tweaks that you think people should make to the way they write that content to take benefit of, let's say, how to or other sort of schema opportunities?
So how do you kind of gauge the benefit, like the ROI of doing it?
Yeah,
In general.
exactly. Or yeah, how do you? I mean, if people, writing kind of blog content to kind of get more sort of visibility for long tail keywords, for example,
Yep.
or to how should what are the kind of the best kind of scheme opportunities to take advantage of within blogs? And have you seen kind of smart combinations of kind of blog content with kind of how tos to give more opportunities to use schema to get more visibility?
Yep. So I'll say like the customers that see the best results are thinking exactly like that. So they're not just thinking of schema markup as like the task after the content's gone live, but they're actually architecting their content to maximize the rich results they can get from features. So if they're writing blogs, for example, like they're like, okay, well, we're just going to make sure we have article schema markup on everything. Okay, well, that's great, but it's not super strategic. They could be like, okay, but on these ones that we're really, really trying to drive performance on, we're going to not just do article, but we're also going to embed an FAQ so that we're like trying to get the article on mobile, but we're going to try to get FAQ also on mobile and desktop. And that's going to like have a bigger impact. And so they're actually then building it into the architecture of their articles to kind of, ask those questions at the beginning in order to figure it out. So the same goes for like a local business landing page, right? So it's like, some of our customers we work with, prior to them actually releasing their new site or sort of as they're building new sites. So you actually go through and you're saying, okay, well, what is on the local business page? What can I maximize? Oh, Martha's like, we can't get ratings. We're going to have those in there, but I'm going to put an FAQ module on it. And so now like, I'm going to make sure I have content for all those pieces. So you can really think of, reviewing and understanding the schema markup features and actually going back and looking at the types of content on your site and then making sure you're maximizing it. And this is a process, frankly, we're doing at Schema App right now to kind of revisit not just like our website and our content, but like our top performing content. How can we help that stuff perform even better? For example, the FAQ webinar content that we just shared, of course, we had to put FAQ schema markup on the FAQ webinar page, right? Or, we had an old webinar that we had the video for health schema markup because we do quite a bit in the health space. And so on that one, we added an FAQ on it so that we could actually get a really great rich result. And what I think is good is if you're constantly thinking about schema markup as a tool in your toolkit as you're designing content. And that's like, I would say like, that's what our best customers do is they think of this as a way to architect content and maximize that right from the get-go.
Okay. Are there any other sort of hidden gems of schema? We talked to you, you're obviously a big fan of FAQ sort of markup. Are there any other hidden gems out there that you find people underutilize or don't see the opportunities to use it because they just haven't considered using it in a certain way?
So I really like collection page. So these are for these like really long pages that have just like, you've sort of, I'll say like over optimized it like for keywords and so forth, sort of for a specific region perhaps or type of product or service. So I really think that those ones we often see like 5 or 6 different types of schema, but they haven't really thought through like how it's connected and how they can maximize that. So I think collection page, and we just wrote a blog on how to do collection page, and we've sort of given some context of how to do it in Schema app, but watch it so you can see how we connect all the different types of content on this page. And we're trying not to give away all of our secrets.
No,
The
please
other
do.
the other one, like FAQ, if you watch our webinar that was just shared there, and we've also blogged about it, like you can use it on pretty much everything. And so it's like one of those things, like, don't give me an excuse that you don't have anything on your site that can get a rich result. Like if you're thinking about this strategically, like there's opportunities in there. How to, like I mentioned earlier, I think is underutilized. So I think there's opportunity to use that.
Mhm.
And then we're just starting to do some tests at scale. Like, so one of our tool, like our editor, like Pro and Multi-Site Pro, is like for kind of smaller sites where you optimize a page by page. But then we also have tools like to do stuff at scale. And we're going to start doing like Speakable at scale and testing that on voice. And so I think that one's interesting. Speakable is still in beta, primarily for like media and news articles. But that will be one sort of, we'll kind of see what happens. They announced, like Google announced, I guess it was last spring as well, like May 2019, that like if you optimize it with structured data, you're not just optimized for search engines, but also for voice assistants. But we haven't seen sort of, I'll say, like a lot of follow through, like let's say, and Mueller's been very clear that like they're not going to add like a voice report in Search Console. They're just, voice search is just another type of search within Search Console. So those would be some of the ones that come top of mind.
Okay, brilliant. So just on the Speakable one then, am I understand that kind of Google, there isn't a sort of separate markup for Speakable, or is
There
there? Or is
is.
it you? Oh, there is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Speakable is basically where you can identify, and it's sort of like an advanced piece where they want you to use what's called an XPath. Think of it as like geo coordinates on the page, like to tell you like where something resides, of a phrase that you would want as the answer in voice. Now, what I think is interesting is that at the same time they announced FAQ Schema Markup, which is question
Mhm.
and answer. And when we, if you think of your own behavior with voice assistants, like we're often asking questions, right? And so the Q&A I think is interesting because our FAQ page is like how it falls in, is very much question and answer structured. And so Speakable is really just, again, like in this long article, what stands out. Now, what's interesting from just like a Google behavior is, I don't know if you've seen it like in a feature box, like sometimes you'll go to the page and then highlight it in yellow, like Google's actually highlighted the page to say, oh, we've taken this snippet out of the page, or this fraggle, I think is sort of the term, and pulled that out. To me, these are all interconnected, right? And it's again us helping the machines find the best piece in order to illustrate it, to help them provide service and match the searcher's intent, which kind of brings us back to like why they did this in the beginning.
So for kind of voice assistants, then obviously FAQs is kind of geared, very much to help voice assistants understand the question answer sort of scenario. But
Yeah.
in longer kind of article-based pages where there isn't specific kind of FAQ schema, you can essentially mark up certain phrases that you think will be very kind of popular or user-friendly in voice search and in voice
Correct.
assistants.
Yeah,
Cool.
Speakable is just in beta, so it's a bit of a limited sort of ability for people to get that. But we'll see sort of what happens later this year.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, thanks, Martha. Another thing that I was not aware of. Great. Okay, let's keep going down. Okay, Jacqueline. Third question from Jacqueline. She's been busy. Are there certain types of schema that you use for different types of local businesses? For example, a local lawn care company versus a dentistry office, a dentist's office versus an attorney.
Mhm. Yeah, so you want to use the most specific type within schema.org. So if you think of like organization as the most generic, and then you have local business, and then within local business, there's all these really specific types. And you want to actually read through those and find out which one is the most specific. There is also the ability to use something called additional type. So the example I often use is like if it's a dentist but you're an orthodontist, you would use dentist as the type of local business, and then you can use the little property called additional type and put in the Wikipedia for orthodontist, and then that clarifies it even further that it's just not a dentist, but it's actually an orthodontist.
Okay, fine. So you can be very specific, and it's best to be as specific as you kind of can do.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I hope that's helpful, John Jack. And next question, and we're about 3 minutes. Martha, are you okay to hold on for 10 minutes
I think
afterwards?
so.
Okay, we'll go through the kind of questions as quickly as I can do. Next question comes from Judy. Judy's question is, hello, she says, when adding schema JSON to a site, do you add it to all pages, e.g. NAP schema to all pages, not just the home page, or do you only add service markup to service page or the home page?
Yeah. So I'm not a fan of what I call peanut butter schema markup, where you just like slather the same markup on every page. And this again comes down to the fundamental of like you're trying to be as specific as possible to tell Google what this page is about so that they can match it to the right search. And so if you have the same markup on every page, which page is actually talking about your service? So kind of going back to that, like how to do a schema markup strategy. And there's like a webinar in there and a toolkit and a long blog. It's going to ask you like, what are those key important pages and like, what are they in the schema markup terms? And then, what feature can you put into it? So yeah, you want to mark up the specific page with the specific type of schema and ideally link it back to the organization so that Google knows how it's all connected. And then I always say like because schema markup tells a story about the business and how it's all related.
Okay, thank you, Martha. Next question, I think is quite a biggie, comes from Josh, is how would you handle schema on a huge site with hundreds or thousands of products?
Oh, this is like a gimme. Well, I call Martha and say, like, Martha, I have a giant site. I don't have access to developers. Could you show me how to use the highlighter so that I can set up the template? So, anytime you have a large site, you're still going to do the same strategy piece, right? You're going to ask, like, what are the most important things for the business to understand? What is it in schema? And then the question is, like, how are you going to implement it? And we always, in the example, we actually are looking at one of our local hockey teams, and they have like a Shopify site and a WordPress blog and then a custom site. Like, it's this whole mismatch of things, which is often common. And so then the question is like, what can you automate out of the box, like really easily? So if it's a WordPress site, feel free to use our free WordPress plugin, or Yoast has their schema markup. Depends on sort of the schema markup strategy you have. If there's an e-commerce site, let's say you're using WooCommerce, like use our plugin for that, or Shopify, etc. But then if you have a giant site that's like on a custom platform, or just like it doesn't fall on blog or product where you can easily automate it, then you sort of look for a solution. Again, our schema app highlighters allows you to click and kind of map really complex schema. So I'm talking about all these embedded things. Save it, tell us where those templates are, and then set up that tag, and boom, bada bing, you're optimized. So it really depends on sort of the type of content and sort of what your challenges are you have, or the resources you have to do it. But if you want to learn more, I'm happy to kind of share with you what we do and sort of what's available there to help you get it done. But it's often with larger sites, it's the big complexity of maintenance, how to make sure it's staying updated, how do you make sure that you can do it without development resources, and how do you make sure you do it properly? And those are things that we solve.
Okay, brilliant. Sounds like Schema Markup is a good solution for Josh's sort of situation. There's actually a follow-on question from Judy, who asked the sort of previous question. I'm going to expand Judy's question. Judy's saying, I have a friend who's a Godaddy website builder site, and there's no access to the back end, which is often a kind of common scenario with kind of off-the-shelf sort of website builders. And there are very many of those. Do you find that actually using those sort of off-the-shelf sort of website builders, it could be GoDaddy, it could be Wix, could be kind of Squarespace, a myriad of them. Do you find that most of them that schema is relatively easy to kind of implement? Are you better off doing it via just in the kind of HTML rather than sort of JSON LD? What's your how do you see the opportunity and the best practice with those types of sites built on those types of platforms?
Yeah. So we've been like Squarespace has been pretty easy to optimize. Like I think I wrote our blog like in 2016. So Squarespace has like had a way to integrate pretty easily for a long time. Wix was more difficult, but they've now sort of introduced sort of this like kind of paste your JavaScript here. So you can either put the JSON LD directly in there, or if you're using a generator, or you can actually put like our JavaScript to connect to Schema app in there. So I have seen like good evolution over the years to make it easier to connect with, I'll say like SaaS companies or software companies like within those. So Squarespace and Wix. GoDaddy is really hard. Like anything, or like hosted WordPress, I think like the free WordPress sites like kind of fall into this, where like you just don't have a lot of control, but like it means you don't have a lot of control in a lot of things around technical SEO. So to me, it really comes down to a business strategy question. Like, is the web important? And, does it make sense to then invest in a platform where you can actually improve things like speed, crawlability, schema markup, etc. And it just, really, having been a small business myself at some point, like you have to kind of make that call. And but I am seeing there's options out there that are still, I'll say, like very reasonably priced, but that allow you to do some of this more advanced schema markup.
And on the I guess the kind of the methodology of the approach for I guess injecting schema, is JSON LD still the kind of your kind of go-to solution, and is that likely to remain the case sort of medium long term?
It's just not me. So Google's been very explicit that they prefer JSON LD over microdata or RDFA, and it kind of makes sense. Like RDFA and microdata sort of like is embedded within the HTML. So if you think of it from, again, a cost perspective, like the crawler has to go through every single line on the page in order to and then extract the schema markup. Where in JSON LD, it's like a block of code, and so it's much more efficient for that robot to go through it. So I don't see them going backwards in that state. I hypothesize at some point, like just like we're seeing licensing with images, like are we going to start licensing our data to be consumed by these machines to then sort of disperse our information? So will it become like our website housing it, or will we start publishing our schema markup somewhere? And these are the type of things we think about at Schema App.
Okay, thank you very much. A few more questions. One of the questions comes from Ryan. If you were just getting started and you want to dip your toe in the water with Schema, with a kind of particular client, where would you start? What do you think is the most easy bit to kind of get right, so that you're kind of learning by doing, learning in action?
Yeah. So I would start with the local business schema markup and contact page, like our contact point. And I believe the BrightLocal team has shared, like we have an ultimate guide in local business schema markup, which is a very, very long document that kind of workshops you through sort of doing that setup. The reason I usually include contact point or the contact page included in that is like, I just, it's like, who are we and how to get hold of us is sort of like go hand in hand. That's where I would start. And then also, again, like ask the question of what can be automated through a plugin. So if like you're optimizing a WordPress site, like use a plugin to get the blog posting schema markup on there, and then sort of add the more detailed kind of local business and contact page. And then the third piece that I would go to is around those products and services. And as a point of fact, like, so we actually did local business schema markup. Like that was the first 3 years of our business was just focused on local business schema markup. But I'll say I would say like those 5 page types. So, like your homepage, which is often the local business, contact, product, services. Oh, I forgot one. There's usually one more. It'll come back to me. But like those are the ones that I would start with.
Service page?
Yeah, product, services, contact, local business.
The other one.
Sometimes depends on what's on there. Yeah, okay. FAQ, some type of FAQ on the site.
Thank you. Yeah.
Blog post. There we go. I just had a brain fart.
Interesting. You mentioned about sort of plugins a second ago, because Brad asked a question. His question says, "It seems like Yoast SEO is muddling up my manual schema markup." Is that an issue you've heard about before, a complaint you've heard about that particular plugin?
So we've been removing Yoast schema markup for a lot of years. So in the Schema App plugin, there's actually a little checkbox that says turn it off. So it's just like whether you turn it off, you can actually turn it off in Yoast as well. Or again, like we've sort of had it built in. Jono and I had conversations recently. Like we have different approaches to the schema markup. They sort of embed everything under website schema markup. There's schema.org types though that are much more specific than websites. So I'm always like, no, this page is about the service and about the product. So we sort of have different points on it. However, I think Yoast is doing a great job of like getting schema markup on lots and lots of sites, since they sort of have that install base across the board. But yeah, there's options within Yoast to turn it off, as well as in Schema App's free plugin. But yeah, you want to make sure that
this is a more generalist approach.
Correct.
Then,
yeah.
Rather than being able to kind of customize and I guess the objective is again about clarity and really giving Google the information it needs to understand. Just kind of lumping everything under website rather than being really specific about what it is, kind of doesn't really take advantage of what you're trying to do here. It's just a quick and easy way of doing it.
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair enough answer. Thanks. Ben has got a question. He said you talked about I think this is about kind of grouping different types of schema on a page, nesting it. Another way of talking about it. So as you talk about adding FAQ schema rather than product schema for a software company, have you ever added both? We found that if we add product schema, the FAQ schema does not show up in results. So you're not benefiting from the rich results. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, good question. I can't think of a specific example where I've seen that, but it could happen. I can take that as a follow up to see sort of if ask my team sort of what they've seen. Again, when we do these kind of diverse pages where we see sort of products and services, we have seen like on some very large software companies where we do like software application and have FAQ to see that come across really well, and that page is set up as a product with an FAQ. So I think it might be just be sort of what it looks like and sort of how it's done. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Question coming from.
And I'll maybe invite, like, feel free for people to tweet at me at Martha Van Berkel. Like if there's like a follow on it, I'm happy to sort of do that follow up there.
Okay, this question comes from Alex. We've got a couple more questions, guys, and I think we'll round things up, finish things off. It says, with Google has kind of deprecated and sort of closed down the structured data testing tool, I decided to do some testing on the rich results tester, and I found it was not able to sniff out the incorrect classes like the structured data testing tool did. Have you found alternatives for that isn't the rich results tester? And what's your kind of go-to?
Am I allowed to have a moment of silence for the dying of the structured data testing tool? Like I haven't been able to like compose myself yet to, I knew this day was coming. They've been telling me for a while. So yes, the structured data testing tool is going away. The reason why I keep using it is because it shows you everything that's on the page. So you can actually like dig into it more easily. Whereas the rich result testing tool, while it has some other really great features, is sort of missing the things that aren't features, right? So Google's kind of, again, focusing them on just like, hey, we're just going to help you figure out if your structured data is good from a feature standpoint. I feel like I've lost an old friend. Me too, Alex. Like this is sort of, I really feel that way. So, Schema app has the structured data testing tool that looks at all of things, that tells you things based on required and recommended across very complex schema markup. So if you do subscribe to Schema app, we do have our testing tool embedded there. And then there's a couple other ones. And I'm trying to. There was an old one that used to be around that I'll dig up. That was out of Europe. That was pretty decent as well.
Okay.
For testing. My Lyme disease, sometimes like my brain isn't as functional, so I have to. I'll dig that one up and I'll tweet it out just so people know it. But yeah, that's another one that you can use. But yeah, I think it's too bad actually. But we were told, from our friends at Google that like they were, there's resources constraints, right? So, they've basically doubled down on one. So it makes sense from that standpoint. But yeah, Schema app customers can use the one that's in the tool that will help them.
Okay, thank you, Martha. This question comes in from Wes. I'm going to slightly steer Wes's question and expand upon it. So his basic question is, he's noticed that tag managers can sometimes have a negative effect on page speed because you're kind of loading in quite a lot. Does use of kind of schema app and loading in, kind of schema markup through the app have any impact? Actually, in general, if you were to really, really heavily load schema markup into kind of page, what impact on page speed might that have?
Yeah, so we've actually, we've done lots of work on this, as you can imagine, because it's especially really important, especially as we get into super, super big sites too. So the one thing when you're doing JavaScript within tag managers, let me start there. So you can use JavaScript to kind of generate your schema markup, which is some of the guidelines or the guides that Google has published on how to do that. You have to still make sure that JavaScript is optimized so that one, it'll get crawled and that it doesn't have a page impact. Because like this is what we do, like I would say like over optimized our JavaScript within the page. And then we're actually just going through another review of that right now. So I think this in the next couple of months, like we'll release our sort of new optimized JavaScript. And if you want to kind of get nerdy and really dig into it, you can Google Tag Manager is not bad for schema markup. And my co-founder, Mark, who's head of product, actually wrote like all the reasons how you make sure that it's working well and does well. So that's like a resource that Jamie can find and share on the chat. With regards to like the actual testing of it, where we find it's not necessarily so. With our tools, like if you're doing really complex schema markup and we're using XPaths, like those geocoordinates, because there's not good structure on your templates and it's super complex, sometimes those ones will have a bigger impact than our usual like 4 milliseconds, I want to say 40 milliseconds, but we're usually like well under that. But if we're doing really complex stuff, sometimes we do find that creeps up. The biggest challenges we run into is the pages that currently don't perform, that have lots and lots of tags or JavaScript loading on the page. And then in that case, it becomes like it's not a schema app challenge. It's just like schema app on top of everything else, kind of then has a bigger impact. So I would just say like think about how you write JavaScript. Think about how many tags we have on the page, and then continue to challenge us to sort of make ours better, which is what we're working on now.
And I presume it sort of loads very early. It sits in the head tag, correct?
Our loads asynchronously, so it actually like won't have a direct impact. But yeah, you can load it anywhere on the page. It doesn't have to be in the head. It can be anywhere on the page.
Yeah. Okay. It looks like we've missed a link there, Martha. Jamie
I'll
said
get
the
it.
first link
I'll get it
missed.
for you.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up one final kind of question. This one comes from Linda. We've talked about her first question, which is about kind of schema and blogs. I thought we had some really, really interesting, good kind of white hats and insights about how to kind of, really sort of extra optimize your kind of blog content beyond just a kind of article schema that you can use. Her second question is, it goes, using the local business kind of markup, she says a business has to have a physical location. What about, say home-based businesses or service area businesses that don't want to talk about their location for whatever reason that is? What problems does that create? And what's your advice for using schema?
All right, I'm going to tell you what the rules are, and then you can sort of determine. So if you are a local business or have a certain service area, but they can't come to your door, you should use organization schema markup, which is sort of better for, I'll say, like global businesses or virtual businesses. And then you could do services schema markup for the service that you offer and use the area served to be very clear as to what the service area you do. And then, again, you can still use your organization, tie it to GMB, et cetera, depending on how you're using GMB for that service area business. So that's what I would do.
Okay, and that's something kind of Google. That's a kind of Google sort of advised approach.
Correct.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, guys, I think we're going to leave it there. We've overrun, which is just typically what we always do because there's just so many good questions and so much to discuss. Martha, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. You've been incredibly clear, incredibly detailed in your answers. I think we've covered a huge amount of ground, all around the kind of topic of schema. Again, the third time we've spoken about it. Definitely sinking in now. I'm going to remember lots more of this stuff than before. I might even be able to describe it to my mother in some sort of layman's terminology she would get, which I think is always a great example.
I have the same challenge with my parents. They're like, "What does your business do?" Like, I don't get it. Well, I think great questions. I think I'm ready for my second cup of coffee. It's thanks for the opportunity.
Always a pleasure. Good luck with everything wherever you are. I hope your people get back into the office in a kind of safe way and get part of that kind of bonding back there that we all miss so much. So good luck with everything. We will be back next week with another webinar. This webinar we are looking at sort of pitching your agency, pitching your kind of services as an agency. So much more of a kind of agency focused webinar as opposed to a kind of technical focused webinar. But it'll be just fantastic. And we're joined by Tim Capper next week. So he is a real genuine bona fide, long in the tooth local SEO expert. So please do join us again next Wednesday. After that, I'm actually taking a holiday for the first time in about 9 months, which I'm very excited about. So we have a little gap in the local search clinics for a kind of couple of weeks. So Martha, once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone who has listened in, pitched in, helped with the chat, added questions. I hope you found that really enjoyable and interesting as much as I did. So we will see you next week. Martha, all the best. Take care. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.